It had been 2 days since I reached the end of myself. That's how Andrew put it. It's like having too short of a fish line. Jesus had always talked about dying to ourselves, and to illustrate what he meant, he would just flay me and cut out the stubborn fish gut pride right out of me. He did it over and over again. You would think I would have learned. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. You see, Judas turned on him. We knew he would, but we didn't want to know. In fact, after they came and arrested Jesus, I promised myself that I would do everything possible to get him freed, even if it meant that I had to give up my own life. But then, when I left the courtyard that evening, after denying him 3 times, I realized that the only thing that I really liked was the one thing I really hated, and that was myself. So I went back to the disciples' house. I had no right to be there, obviously, after denying Jesus 3 times. And who did I run into but Mary, the mother of Jesus? She offered me some water. I was exhausted. I crawled over to a corner in the room and I fell asleep. And I went into a dream. The dark, faceless thing began to circle around me. I was dressed in filthy rags. And it's like the rags were just being yanked off of me by this dark thing. It kept yanking at the rags until I had nothing left. I was naked. The faceless thing lifted me up in this huge net, and I was surrounded by these horrendous, ugly fish, and I realized that I was one of them. Surrounded by those fish, they lifted the net up into the pit, the garbage pit on the outskirts of Jerusalem. They call it Gennesaret. The pit was burning, and the flames began to just sear at my skin. I watched in horror as my own flesh just burned right off. The dark thing continued to tear at me, kept throwing me back into the flames. I began to crawl, using my fingertips to grab onto the gravel and to crawl up the side of the pit. But the dark thing would grab me and pull me back until finally I got to the edge of the pit, and there was a foot, a beautiful and yet horribly scarred foot. I grabbed onto the ankle while that dark, ugly thing is grabbing onto me. And blood from that foot began to pour onto my head, my neck, my shoulders, and onto that dark, ugly thing. And when it hit that dark thing, that blood acted like acid, and it just burned off that dark thing, and it finally fell down into the bottom of the pit where it was burning in the fire. And I grabbed on to that foot with my other hand. Then a hand reached down, a hand that was scarred much like the foot, grabbed onto me and pulled me out of the pit. My skin started growing back, and my tattered rags that had been ripped off of me began to be knit in white, beautiful cloth, and my clothes came back. When I awoke, I heard voices back on the road. So I went down there, ended back at the disciples' house, where I could see that they were on the top of the roof. So I grabbed a ladder. I went up there with them. But as I got to the top and I saw the disciples, they were all crying, not saying a word, looking over in the distance at the hill called Golgotha. And when I looked, I saw 3 men there being crucified. And then I understood, as I just sat there, and I couldn't cry, I couldn't feel a thing. What now? Jesus was gone. There was nothing but darkness. And I reached the end of myself.